Okay, let's start here. Good. Okay. What is the first part? Come, my beloved, to greet the bride. Let us welcome the Shabbos. My revered father-in-law, the Rebbe Yatz. Umevi kavod kedushas moiri v'chami admor b'mamoroi l'chodoidi midrushe hachasuno. My revered father-in-law, the Rebbe Yatz, relates in a maamar entitled Lecha Dodi, which we just completed the third part yesterday, so you can find that on the same page, which included the series of wedding maimarim cited by the Rebbe Yatz in conjunction with the Rebbe's maimar, with the Rebbe's wedding to his daughter, Rebbe Chaim Mushka. Okay, so the Rebbe married is the previous Rebbe's daughter. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer, quoting Rabbi Eliezer in the Medrash. Okay, particularly states only that the bridegroom resembles a king. The analogy of a bride to a queen is mentioned by the Maharal in Chiddushei Gadus on Bava Kama 32a. No surprise there; it's 32, but daf 32. That a groom resembles a king and a bride a queen. The simple meaning is that the bride and groom should be honored like a king and queen, however, on a deeper level. As reflected by the commentators in Shir Shirim, in the analog, the groom refers to God and the bride to the Jewish people. In the spiritual realms, the spheros, the analog is Zer Anpin, literally the small face, the Kabbalistic term for the six emotive attributes of Atzilos, and Malchus, the sphere of sovereignty. Let's see what the note here is on Zer Anpin. Zer Anpin is called small in relation to Arachan, from the long face, the external attribute of Kesser. Right, because one is finite and the other one is infinite. So small meaning it could be measured, right? Whereas Arachanpin, the long face, cannot. It's truly infinite. The Chasan hu bechina Zer Anpin, v'chala hi bechinas Malchus. Zer Anpin represents the groom and Malchus the bride. The phrase "Come, my beloved, to greet the bride. Let us welcome the Shabbos." Shehu inyan hamshachas Zer Anpin lemalchus reflects a transmission of influence, like hashpa, from the groom Zer Anpin to Malchus the bride. As mentioned in the introduction, the relationship between a mashpia, a source of influence, and a giver, and a makabel, or recipient, there are three types of influence. Okay, hashpa. So we're talking about influence. It's all about influence. What kind of influence? Malchus, influence, receiving Malchus. Hashpa, panimis, influence. Internalized, meaning the mashpia imparts something substantial to the makabel that the makabel can absorb and internalize, meaning you say something very profound to somebody and they actually receive it, or somebody says something profound to you and you actually are able to internalize it right then and there. This influence is by definition limited and dependent on the level of the recipient, right? Meaning it was tailor-made to the recipient. That's how they were able to receive it so well. how much he's capable of receiving, and then there's a different kind of bestowal. Hashpa be'oifen makif, influence that is imparted in an encompassing manner, meaning this might be like someone saying that went over my head, right? Also called hashpa chitzoni is external influence. When a mashpia is on a far higher plane than the makabel and he desires to express himself spontaneously, there's no way that he can communicate what he wishes to convey to the makabel, right? Trying to explain something to a toddler, right? Something of profound depth to a toddler in a manner that the makabel can internalize what he is receiving. Therefore, the mashpia does not even attempt to relate to the recipient on his level. Instead, he conveys influence in a manner that the recipient is aware that it is far above him. Therefore, it's called makif, encompassing. It's also called chitzonius, external. For the makabel cannot internalize it, and even for the mashpia, it does not represent his inner core. True, he's expressing himself naturally without restraints. However, he is not conveying his essence. Even though the makabel cannot internalize this influence, it has a positive dimension. It exposes the makabel, the recipient, to the higher plane on which the mashpia functions. Right? It's like if you've ever been awestruck by something you thought you were good at, and then you see someone who's really good at it, and then you're like nothing compared to him, right? That's this idea. It exposes the makabel to the higher plane on which the mashpia functions, and in doing so, elevates. But it makes you want to rise to that level. Elevates the makabel beyond the horizons of his own constraints. It makes you want to burst out of your limited level so that you can reach at least that level. And then there's the third type of bestowal or influence called hashpa atzmis, essential influence. Influence that is conveyed, and always the third is the one that we're going to focus on. It's the transcendent dimension, the one that unifies the first two. The influence that is conveyed transcends not only the makabel, but the conscious state of the mashpia as well. The mashpia communicates not only the peripheral aspects of his being, but something of his own essential core. He gives of himself, literally. When such influence is conveyed, both the mashpia and the makabel align themselves with their respective essential cores and bond with each other in a manner that transcends their own conscious states of being, meaning everyone is greater because of this interaction. When we are speaking about a relationship between a bride and a groom, and in the sublime realms, the relationship between Zer, Anpin, and Malchus, right, the two lower aspects of the highest world of Atzilus, all three of the above forms of influence are conveyed. The first two levels of connection are necessary as preparatory stages that enable hashpa atmis to take place. V'seder hamshachahu, the pattern by which influence is conveyed, is asher techilat tzricha liyos hamshacha chitzoniis. The pattern by which the conveyed is first there's hashpa chitzoniis. First there's an external transmission of influence. Which is interesting. I don't know why when they listed them, they listed this second, but okay. So first there's external, meaning it goes over their head. It's something that's not really internalized, but it gets you perked up. It gets you excited about it. Mizer Anpin to Malchus. From Zer Anpin to Malchus. Okay. Shehirak Bivchinas Makif, which is only an encompassing light. Again, over your head. Yet you know that there's something that went over your head, so you're connected to it in that way at least. A revelation that reflects the attribute of the mashpia as he exists on his own level, meaning he's not limiting himself or curtailing his expression for the recipient. He's just expressing himself as he is. And hence is too lofty for the makabel to internalize. As such, it leaves only a general impression on the makabel, right? But not a specific one that's actually been internalized. Nevertheless, that hashpa chitzoniis makes it possible that. But there's a benefit. There's a residual benefit to this. Afterwards, it can be followed by hashpa panimis, inner influence. So it makes a way for there to be an influence, right? Because at least the recipient knows that there's something there of value, so they can stick around and they can remain connected. Okay. Afterwards, it can be followed by hashpa panimis, inner influence. A mashpia who is on a higher level than the makabel is faced with a dilemma. Since the makabel is on the level of the mashpia and indeed cannot even fathom that level, if the mashpia desires to share his own awareness with the makabel, he must initiate the process. And yet, if he communicates to the makabel on his own level, the makabel will not be able to accept and internalize what is given to him. So what's the mashpia to do? Conversely, if he descends to the makabel's level, the makabel will never be exposed to the higher level of the mashpia. So there's a balance to be struck here, right? Inner communication, hashpa pnimis, between the two is made possible only through a carefully designed process, right? A targeted approach. Establishing an external connection through hashpa chitzoniis is the initial stage of this process. Indeed, such a sequence occurs in every transmission of influence from a mashpia to a makabel, right? Anytime you connected to a teacher, let's say, initially the teacher said something that maybe went over your head, but it got you interested. It made you rise to the occasion so that they can actually deliver something that will be internalized by you. But without the initial step where it went over your head, you would never have been motivated to rise up to receive. At first, the influence must be transmitted from the external aspects of the mashpia to the external aspects of the makabel. Okay, so this is like when a truck wishes to receive, let's say, goods from a factory to deliver it somewhere. First, the truck and the factory have to make a connection on a most superficial level. The outside of the truck backs up and makes contact with the outside of the factory, so that they can open up their latches, right, and their whatever they are, those gates, and then there can be a transmission internally of the goods. But first, they have to make an external connection. Through this external communion, the makabel ascends so that he can approach the level of the mashpia. So the truck is nowhere compared to the factory, yet when they make this external connection, now they can actually exchange internally. Through exposure to the higher level of the mashpia, even though it's only in a manner that is makif, the makabel is elevated and raised to a level whereby it's possible to internalize. So now the truck actually becomes an extension of the factory, so that it can actually receive whatever was being produced in the factory, so that it can deliver it, right? Let's say to a Target or a Walmart, let's say. Whereby it is only possible to internalize the influence the mashpia will subsequently convey to him. So that afterwards the makabel is capable of receiving hashpa panimis from the mashpia. Moreover, as will be explained, hashpa atmis, essential influence, is also invested in the hashpa panimis, an essential influence. In his maamar, the Rebbe Yatz illustrates this concept with two analogies, right? We learned this recently, so this should be fresh in our minds. Assuming it didn't go over our heads, assuming it wasn't just a hashpa chitzoni. The communication between a teacher and a student. The of and the father playing with his small child. Okay, these are two types of greater, right? There's a giver and a receiver, and they're on very different levels, and yet there's a connection forged because there's initial external influence conveyed. It's possible to say that the intent of offering these analogies is not merely to bring examples that demonstrate the order of transmission, i.e. the transmitting hashpa chitonis is a preparatory stage that makes possible the transition of hashpa pnimis. That's not the only reason. But also to emphasize the lofty levels contained within both these types of influence. So we should appreciate that they're both not just, one is not just a means to an end, they both have a unique value that they bring, separate from, right, aside from being part of this process. As will be explained in the subsequent section, with these analogies, the maamar is emphasizing the sequence necessary for such communication to occur. The hashpa chitzonis, the external influence, will serve as a preparatory step that makes an internal connection possible. Nevertheless, the analogy chosen also highlight the lofty level conveyed by both types of influence. Firstly, the analogies underscore that the gam hashpa chitzonis hi darga na'alis beyoser. Even the hashpa chitzonis represents a very lofty level, to the point where it possesses an advantage over the hashpa panimis. Why? For the hashpa chitonis, which is encompassing light, is above the vessels, the ability to accept and internalize of the recipient. So you might think because the person can't receive it that it's a lower level. No, it's actually a high level. It's so high that the person can't receive it. In this approach, the mashpia, then that's like Hashem, right? We draw down Hashem's infinite light, and that's like mitzvos. Mitzvos are like clothing; they go on us instead of in us, like food. And because of that, they're not lower; they're actually infinitely higher because they can't be internalized into something finite. In this approach, the mashpia shares of himself without restraining or adapting his qualities. Right? That's like Hashem revealing himself without limiting enough for us to internalize. That's like mitzvah. In contrast, the mashpia adapts the hashpa pnimis in a manner so that it can be accepted and internalized within the vessels of the recipient. Thus, the maamar is highlighting the lofty level of hashpa chitzonis. Nevertheless, despite the advantage of the external connection, it serves only as an introduction to the hashpa pnimis. Okay. Ki dafka ali de hashpa pinimis magiim leilui na'ala yoser shlamaila mibchinas makif. For it is specifically through hashpa pinimis that an even loftier rung that surpasses the encompassing influence is attained. Okay, so it's very great, yet it's also just the preparatory stage for this internal influence, which is actually going to affect the person on a much more set and realistic and real level. Generally, hashpa panimis reflects a lower rung for the very fact that it can be internalized, but the recipient indicates that it's a defined entity that has been adapted to the recipient's capacities, right? It's like any God that I can understand is not a God that I want, right, as my God. You want a God that's infinite, beyond your ability to understand. If you're able to understand him, then it's kind of a low level. In this instance, however, the maamar is referring to hashpa panimis in which hashpa atzmis has been invested. Okay, so but now we're talking about the second part, the internalized, where there's the third level, which let's say synergizes the two. This essential influence transcends even the mashpia's revealed level. Okay, so when this is done correctly, when there's an external level that precedes the internal level, and that's all for the purpose of this hashpa atzmis, which is the essence level, then the internal level, the limited finite second stage, is actually a very high level because it's preceding the hashpa atzmis. Al kol kavod chuppah, the rung is alluded to with Rabbi Yatz Maimer by the quote, "Upon all the glory shall there be a canopy." Where's that from? That's from Yeshayahu, chapter 4, verse 5. Glory refers to splendor that radiates naturally. Despite its lofty level, it is an external quality, right? Glory is only something that comes off of somebody. It's not something that's internalized per se. The person does not invest himself in its transmission. It's just something that happens. A chuppah, marriage canopy, is also set up above the bride and groom. Thus, both glory and chuppah refer to the influences that are makif. Okay, something that transcends and encompasses, and not internalized necessarily. Shehem shtei bechinos kavod. The word all implies two aspects of glory. Kavod chasan and kavod kalo. The glory of the groom and the glory of the bride, which in the spiritual realms refers to zer anpin and malchus. And on an even higher level, the glory of the supernal father, the sphere of chachma, wisdom, and the glory of the supernal mother, the sphere of bina, understanding, right? So these are kind of parallels that occur in the higher realms. You have four levels in the higher realm, right? Mother, father, abba, ima, and then you have zer anpin and malchus. So we're talking about zer anpin and malchus as being bride and groom, but they actually mimic the higher level of mother and father, which are almost too lofty to be even to talk about, so to speak. They're kind of one with Hashem himself. Through this transmission of glory, though merely an external influence, for glory is amorphous. It's not a quality that is understood. The union of Chacham Bina and the union of Zer Anpin and Malchus is brought about. Although both what? Squiggle backward are used because the original text uses two sets of parentheses, one inside the other. Okay. The glory and the marriage canopy of the supernal father and the supernal mother. And the glory and the marriage canopy of Zer Anpin and Malchus are encompassing lights. Nevertheless, it is well known. What's well known? That specifically through the union of Zer Anpin and Malchus, Shehu Yichud Pnimi, which is an inner bond, Nimshach Ha'etzem, God's essence is drawn down. Okay, so once we have this union, which was the result of there being both an external influence and then an internal influence, you're able to draw down this God Hashem's essence. Hashem's essence is drawn down through this union. Okay, let's read the summary and then we'll stop today with part one. The maamar delivered by the Rabbi Yatz explains that the relationship between a bride and a groom on the earthly plane serves as an analogy reflecting the relationship between the Jewish people and Hashem. In the spiritual realms, the analog is the relationship between Zer Anpin, Za, right? That's the emotional attributes in the realm of Atzilus. The Kabbalists interpret the six emotive attributes of Atzilus and Malchus, the sphere of sovereignty, right? The feminine dimension, the recipient, usually related to David HaMelech, sometimes the moon, etc. The phrase "Come, my beloved, to greet the bride" reflects a transmission of influence, hashpah, from the groom Zer Anpin to Malchus, the bride. The pattern by which influence is conveyed is the first. There is hashpah chitzonis, an external transmission of influence, which is only an encompassing light. Afterwards, it's followed by hashpah panimius, an inner influence. Such a sequence occurs in every transmission of influence from mashpia to makabel. At first, the influence must be transmitted from the external aspects of the mashpia to the external aspects of the makabel. Through this external communication, the makabel ascends so that he can approach the level of the mashpia. Afterwards, the makabel is capable of speaking hashpah panimius. In his maamar, the Rabbi Yatz illustrates this concept with two analogies. These analogies do not merely demonstrate the order of transmission, they emphasize that both these types of influence reflect lofty levels. They're both essential to the whole process. Hashpach chitzonius reflects how the mashpia shares of himself without restraining or adapting his qualities. Okay, this is just the mashpia just being what he is, just giving off to whatever he is, not tailoring what he is for the recipient. Nevertheless, the hashpah panemius that follows conveys an even loftier level because it's invested hashpah atzmis, because within that is the ultimate, which is the third level investment that we're going to talk about, which is where Hashem's essence is actually drawn down. An essential influence that transcends even the mashpia is revealed wrong. Okay, we'll stop here for today.